I'm the bad guy. I'm the, I'm the
Welcome back to another episode of Across the Gridiron. I am Matt, and once again, I am joined by my friend and yours, Eddie Equo. Eddie, my friend, how are you, sir?
I am doing great, Matt. And listen, it's been a great couple of days. I've had some time to reminisce, on the Cowboys and the Eagles, and all of that. So um, I'm looking forward to our topics today because I think we've got some great ones. And before we get into it, guys, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And we appreciate all of you that are watching the channel as well and dropping your comments.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. We are only 94 days away from the beginning of the NFL season, and we're only 251 days away from the Super Bowl. So there we go. We can really start planning that weekend already. So, so yeah, look, Eddie, as mentioned, we've got a couple of things we want to talk about today. Yeah, we're still in the postseason or the preseason, I should say. Not a huge amount of news to talk about, but
Topics are hard.
topics are hard to come by. But we are here for you to at least talk about something to give you your weekly NFL fix from here in the UK. So there's a couple of things we want to try and talk through today. Last week we talked about some of the most disappointing teams of 2024. We're going to flip that on its head and we're going to look at some of the most improved teams of 2024. We're then going to look at one of the most interesting things when you're looking at reviewing or previewing a season, sorry, and that's looking at some of the rookie QBs. We're going to start looking at who are the likely QBs, rookie QBs who are going to start in week one. And I suppose the only real bit of news that came out over the course of the week is Hard Knocks and the teams that are selected for Hard Knocks. You know, that's the one thing that a lot of NFL fans really look forward to really get the juices going for the beginning of the season. So we'll talk about that sort of in the last part of the show.
I'm the,
Let's just dive straight into it today. So let's look at some of the most improved teams of 2024. So as we said, last week, we focused on some of the most disappointing teams of 2024. And the reason why we did it is Eddie needed a reason to mention the Dallas Cowboys because I mean, I don't know if you actually noticed on the intro, it took him I think Dallas Cowboys was maybe his fifth and sixth word today. So he's got to get it. He's actually not wearing any Dallas Cowboys merch today for the first time, I think, since we've done the show. But we're not going to talk about it much in this one because we're going to look at some of the most improved teams of 2024. So, look, the most obvious one, the most standout one that I think is worth talking about is the Washington Commanders. You know, they had an incredible season, an incredible turnaround, certainly from 2023 as well. They went from a 3-13 record to clinching a playoff spot and were a game away from being in the Super Bowl. Jaden Daniels was obviously the bright light of that team. He was the guy, some will say almost single-handedly, turned that team around, and he really brought a new energy to that team. Eddie, what are your thoughts on the Commanders?
Yeah, absolutely. A team that is in my division, the NFC East, and for me, the Commanders is epitomizes, the beauty about the NFL. See, I had to use a big word there.
Yeah, you nearly got it right as well, Eddie. You nearly got it.
The beauty about the NFL where, a team can be absolutely dismal and then the next season, they're almost pushing for the Super Bowl. And the Washington Commanders, I think they caught everyone by surprise, completely. Certainly caught, everyone in the division by surprise. And what's interesting last season was that they had 6 games that was a one-score game. Right. And it kind of tells you how close things are in the NFL. Of course, Jaden Daniels, he was drafted last season. And I'm gonna, make reference because we did a video on the channel, at the start of the season talking about the rookie quarterbacks, Keller Williams, Jaden Daniel, and Bo Nix. And I did remember saying that out of all the people that I saw in the preseason, Jaden Daniel was one of those that reminded me like a player who was ready to hit the ground running. And hit the ground running, he did. So for the Washington Commanders, they couldn't have asked for anything better. With all the drama that went on with the team, sold, the ownership had to be kicked out of the NFL. They got a new owner, got a new coach, Dan Quinn, coming over from Dallas Cowboys. And, they had been building, quietly in their defense, building their defense. And everyone knows that Dan Quinn's signature is about the defense. So they certainly had a very impressive season. And, they were that close, of getting to the Super Bowl. And the fact that they absolutely shellacked the the Detroit Lions on their way there even made that run even more impressive.
No, absolutely. Like they were certainly the surprise package of last season. I think Daniels was a surprise package even at the QB level.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do you think they'll do this year? Because I think
Um,
that's really easy. I think that's a really tough one. I mean, they're in a division with the Super Bowl champions. Who are
yeah.
they again, Eddie? Yeah, sorry. So yes,
The Philadelphia
the
Eagles.
Philadelphia
Cry,
Eagles.
Eagles, cry.
So they're in a division with the Eagles, the Giants, and the Cowboys. Now the Giants and the Cowboys are two of the franchises who have the highest tendency to maybe shit the bed over the course of a season. But it's obviously it's still not good. It's not going to be an easy run to the season. You know, Daniels last year we talked about him being a surprise package. He's no longer a surprise package,
No,
right?
no, it's not.
They because they did well last season, they had to draft relatively low
Mhm.
in the draft this season. How do you think they're going to do going into the 2025 season?
I think it's going to be down to their schedule. The schedule usually is the great equalizer, in the NFL. Who do you play first? Who are the first couple of games? When do you have your bye, in the season? How many games that you're playing against tough oppositions away from home? How many games are you playing, at home? These are some of the things that are going to make the difference, for the Washington Commanders. I expect them to take a step back, the same thing as CJ Stroud in Texans, because I just think that, once you've got a film out there, for 17 games in the NFL, I bet you all coordinators are doing this offseason. They're watching all of those games. They're looking for tendencies, right? And this is something that you hear a lot of, experts talk about in the NFL. What are the tendencies, of the players? What are the tendencies of the quarterbacks? If he's gonna, go towards his left, is he strong throwing to his left? Is he strong throwing to his right? And so people start to game plan, right? Okay, we need to keep him in the pocket. We need to make sure we flush him to his left because he's not great throwing, with his right or something like that. So all of those tendencies are going to come out for Jaden Daniels, and it's going to be left for him to take that next step up in this 2025 season. So I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough. They're running it back, with their running back, almost sounded like a pun, with Brian Robinson, who I don't think he cracked 1,000 yards last season, but I think what they had was Terry McLaurin, scary Terry. He is a matchup for anyone in the secondary. And I think with Debo Samuel, if he stays fit and available, I think it gives that offense another juice. And then they had Zach Ertz, who came over from the Eagles to the Commanders. That made difference as well. I think that, when you have six close games that are one-score games, they can go either way, right? And you don't expect to sustain those sort of things season after season. So, you kick a field goal to win a game. I remember the Hail Mary that he had against the Bengals, I think, in last season where he came back to win that game. So those sort of games, you just don't know how it would go in your direction. So I think there would be a step back, but I still expect them to play competitively with a lot of teams this season.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and they get two easy victories against Dallas as well. Throw it in there for good measure. Um, so let's look at another side. Another
Yeah.
team that surprised many was Minnesota Vikings,
Oh,
especially the QB again, QB level again, with Sam Darnold coming in from nowhere to really lead that team forward. What did you reckon to the Vikings season? Did they surprise
yeah.
you at all?
They did. They did surprise me. Vikings. Shout out to my mate Tim in the US. He's a Vikings fan, so he
Shout
always
out Tim.
always wants me to talk about the Vikings. I mean, I remember going to the US Bank Stadium in the US to watch the game, and in real life, I saw the whole spectacle, the Vikings chant, the Skull chant, and the Galahorn, and the drum beat that goes with, the Vikings celebration in the stadium. And it was quite something, right? They're actually coming to the UK this year, playing the Cleveland Brown in one of the international games. So I'm looking forward to going for that game. I thought the Vikings were a sneaky good side, but at the same time, people had doubts about their records. Remember, we're talking about it, last season, and we're saying, well, they're one of the, I think, 11-1 teams that people don't give a lot of respect to. But I think
Mhm.
in terms of how they performed that season, I don't think anyone gave them a chance, especially when their quarterback went down. They just drafted a quarterback, JJ McCarthy, and everyone expected the way he played in preseason, he was going to take the reins, and then we'll kind of see how the Vikings look like. And they're playing in a very competitive division, as well. But there's no one would have expected Sam Darnold's performance in the Vikings.
No.
I think it was absolutely out of this world. I can't think of another performance like that of a QB in a long time, where a QB who has bounced around the league. Notably, everyone remembers him talking about seeing ghosts when he was with the New York Jets. And look, he definitely wasn't seeing ghosts. He was seeing Justin Jefferson, in that Vikings team, with Madison, running the ball. And then, you had, playmakers, all around, the Vikings. Now, of course, I think, their inexperience let them down, and Sam Darnold turned into a pumpkin in the worst, time, for the Vikings. But still, I think it was very, very impressive, how they came across last season.
Oh, for certain. I mean, like, you bring in a rookie like JJ McCarthy, that he was originally named as sort of backup to
Yeah.
Darnold when he first got brought in at the training camp. But I think his injury was just the worst possible thing for him. And, he was, after his injury in, preseason camp, and he had to have the surgery, he became the first round pick at QB level to miss the entire season through to injury. Right. So you then get stuck in inverted commas with Sam Darnold, someone who was, let's say, flattered to deceive throughout his career. No one was particularly enthused about it. No one was excited about it. No one thought the Vikings would do anything last season, anything at all. There were people thought they might sneak a winning record, but not by much. But nobody would have had them having a 14-2 record in the regular season. Absolutely none. Darnold was absolutely superb. He's the first quarterback in the NFL to win 14 games in their first season with a team. This is Sam Darnold, right? Nobody would have expected that, right? And he's played. It's the funny thing about it. He's played his way out of the Vikings by being so good, which you don't always see. And he's now landed at the Seahawks, and I'm sure we
Yeah.
will talk about that in the future. But yeah, it was an incredible season for the Vikings. Now, I asked you the same question as I did about the Commanders. Is going into 2025, how would you see the Vikings faring? Now, obviously, we're hoping to have do a Vikings special at some point in the preseason, but just for today, how do you think they'll be doing next season?
I mean, you've still got largely a lot of the things that were right with the Vikings last season. Obviously, they've got a new quarterback, and it's going to be left to be seen. I think there has to be incredible amount of faith with the Vikings. And I did, listen to Kevin O'Connell, talk about it in a podcast. And he was just, they were talking about the international game, coming over to the UK, what that means. And then there was a question that was asked, about the quarterback, JJ McCarthy. And what he said was the fact that JJ McCarthy, even though he was injured, he had to sit for a year, learning the playbooks, getting better with the team, understanding what they're trying to do, why they're doing things that. So he feels like even though it was injury, he was still a very beneficial time for JJ McCarthy. So he would have learned a lot that will prepare him to be the start of the season. And isn't that what most teams want? In a way that you've drafted a rookie quarterback and then you want them to spend some time, in the background, just learning while you have a bridge quarterback. That's what they call them, a bridge quarterback, someone who will just sort of, help the rookie to, get, understand what it means to play quarterback in the league. And this was unforced for the Minnesota Vikings, but I think it would help them. And listen, Kevin O'Connell is seen as one of those bright young coaches, same with, Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur and Green Bay Packers. So I think he's got a good coach. I think I expect them to be competitive. Now, that's a very difficult division. That's a division that has got the Vikings, Green Bay Packers, Lions, and the Bears. And don't sleep on the Bears, right? Because you expect Caleb Williams, to take a step up this season. Now that he's got Ben Johnson, who left the Detroit Lions, is now head coach for the Bears. So, yeah, but I expect, I don't know if all three of them are going to make the playoffs, because that's another show when we'll talk about that. But I expect them to be competitive. Hopefully, I'll probably see maybe 9 wins, at least for the Vikings this season.
Okay, excellent. So let's move on. I want to touch on maybe two more before we end part one. So let's try and rattle through some of these quickly.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about is the Detroit Lions. So like I think a lot was was a lot expected of the Lions this season. I think certainly going into the season, obviously they had the draft in Detroit last season, so Eminem was certainly bigging them up. But they achieved a franchise record of 15-2 for last season, which was a big improvement on what they did the year before. What they did really well is obviously they really found a good balance between the offense and the defense. And I'm just trying to pull it here. Obviously, the focal point of their success was the offense, right? They had a 564 total points scored, and they actually had the biggest points differential in the league of plus 222, which
Wow.
is which is massive. It was their fourth most, and it was the fourth most points ever scored in a regular season. So people thought might do well, they might challenge for the playoffs, but to do what they did was last season. Obviously, they just fell short in the end, but I mean they improved drastically from
Yeah.
2023.
Yeah, they did. They were handing out 40 points like, on an Oprah show, to everyone, just giving out, you get 40, you get 40, everyone gets 40. It was just ridiculous, right? It was like, you look at the Lions and they seem like they came into the game not just to win, but to also to just pummel teams and embarrass teams. I think it was just like that. Remember, they played against the Dallas Cowboys and they do all kinds of trick plays and all of that. So of course I wasn't going to be rooting for them. So maybe that karma caught up with them later on in the season. But you've got to say that they've got some very good players. Amon Central, good wide receiver, probably one of the top five receivers right now in the NFL. Jameer Gibbs, right? Great running back. And they had a great offensive line. And their defense absolutely ridiculous, right? And I think eventually they got injuries in their defense, which is effectively what happened because they just couldn't keep up with the Commanders, in that division game, right? Because I think the game was 40 something to 30 something. To even score 30 something game points and lose the game is something.
Oh,
So
it was an incredible game.
yeah, it was. It was an absolutely incredible game. I think they did very well. Of course, what comes with success is that you lose all the things that you did that everyone else wants. The offensive coordinator left, defensive coordinator also left as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how they realign themselves. And I think this is always what challenges coaches when you know good coaches, where they can bring offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators and still retain the identity and still retain the level of performance. So Detroit Lions did very well.
Absolutely. And I think going into next season, I think one of the biggest things that stands out for me, they were 6-0 in their division last season.
Mm.
They were unbeaten, straight flush against the Packers, against the Vikings, and against the Bears. If they keep up that record, they're going into the playoffs again. Right.
But that's
That's
hard to
without quote.
do.
It's
That's
going to be
hard to do.
it's very hard to do, but they
Hard to
dominated that.
do.
They dominated that division, and we just said that how well the Vikings were doing last season with a 14-3. The NFC last season was an incredibly
Oh,
tough league. I mean, it's like they were neck and neck,
I mean, you
with
had three teams come out of that division into the playoffs, right?
oh yeah.
Three team, and the Packers we're going to talk about next. They're also in the, they're in the division too as well. So
Let's give so the Green Bay Packers some love for 5 minutes. Obviously, they clinched a playoff. They were 11-6. You know, they had a bit of a resurgence in their performance. You know, they a lot of this was down again to the development of their sort of their young quarterback.
yeah.
So again, how did you see the Green Bay Packers, and what do you put their performance down to?
I love the Green Bay Packers and their coach, I think it's gonna say now I'm mentioning Dallas Cowboys, but I got to, right?
Boo.
2 seasons ago, they came to the Dallas Cowboys and absolutely shellacked us in the playoff game. And I got to see the Green Bay Packers up close and personal playing against it. And I was hoping with Aaron Rodgers leaving the Packers that the Packers will no longer be a nightmare team for the Cowboys, but not the case, right? It was still the same deja vu feeling, with the desk caught it, didn't catch it, the the funny, we've had some heartbreaking losses against the Green Bay Packers, and I know 49ers have been added to that list for the Dallas Cowboys. But I just love how they run their offense. Very adaptable. You can kind of see, some of the elements from the influences of Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. They do a lot of motions in their games, and the offense, which unsettles teams as well. They do a lot of masking of their plays. And when you've got a running back like Josh Jacobs, who was traded from the Raiders to the Green Bay Packers, I really was so jealous because that was the kind of thing that you wanted the Dallas Cowboys to do. And there is a theme, right? That goes with a lot of the teams that did well last season, and that's good running backs, right? I know there are a couple of exceptions, out there, but for me, Josh Jacobs, good running back, over 1,000 yards. And when you have that balance for a young quarterback, that everyone always says the running game is a young quarterback's best friend. And Jordan Love got paid, but then you don't want him to go do all the work all the time. So I thought it was a smart, play. The Green Bay Packers, obviously, schedule always helps as well. But I think this season they will be competitive as well. I think they will probably win another nine or so games. Now, everything is going to depend on what else is happening in that conference, that NFC conference, right? Are other teams stepping up in other divisions? We know, divisions like the NFC East, the NFC West, the 49ers took a step back in the NFC West, but they might be having a resurgence, this season as well. We talked about Brock Purdy getting his money last week as well. So it might not be enough to get them into the playoffs, depending on how the Vikings and the Lions do, but I will still put them in contention to at least make it, maybe as a wild card.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's again, we just talked about that division. We've so far we picked four most improved teams, and three of them came from a single division. It's almost like we looked like the most lazy journalism ever. We've just picked one division. Okay, we'll just pick three of those. That'll do.
Yeah, we could call it the NFC North review of last season.
Absolutely. I mean, the only other team I think we'll give a brief mention to is the Raiders. You know,
Yeah.
Geno Smith at quarterback again did incredibly well. And if ESPN's writer Ben Sholak even gave them his title the most improved team. But
Mm.
I think let's call that the end for there at part one. For you guys watching at home, who do you think was the most important team? Leave it in the comments. Shout at us. Tell us we forgot your team. Whatever you want to do. But that'll do for part one. And we'll be back in part two when we're going to look forward to some of the rookie QBs and who's going to start in week one. Welcome back to part two of Across the Gridiron. So let's move on now. As I said, let's look at some of the rookie QBs going into week one of the 2025 season. We thought this section is probably going to be a little bit shorter than if we did this 12 months ago. But let's look at some of the rookie QBs who were drafted in this year's draft, and let's look at whether we think they are going to sit going into week one. So look, it's an easy place to start. It's an obvious place to start. But Cam Ward, drafted number one overall by Tennessee Titans, he has to start, doesn't he, going into week one, doesn't he, Eddie?
He has to start. I think the team have declared their intentions when they drafted him. They had Will Levis in the team, and he was drafted last year. So that really tells you, what they think about his chances of starting. And you're watching the OTAs and you hear the coaches come out and then they say stuff like, "Oh, don't read into much, what's going on, who takes the first reps, who takes the most reps, and all of that. We're still just giving everyone the opportunity." I call BS on that.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear that you're gearing towards Cam Ward, starting. And for me, that's why you pick a number one overall, in the draft. Very rarely do teams pick a number one overall player and don't start him the next season. I think
Yeah.
I can't remember at the top of my head, where that has happened. I think once you pick someone number one overall, I'm thinking Trevor Lawrence was a number one overall pick. Baker Mayfield was a number one overall pick. Bryce Young was a number one overall pick. All of these players started in your team. So I think it's very obvious Cam Ward, he's going to start. You can put money on it. He's going to start in week one.
Oh yeah, I think he's an absolute shoe-in, as you said. The hype that goes into these, first round, the first overall picks is huge. you couldn't put all that investment in him, get all the fan excitement in him, build him all up to then bench him, right? Let him sit and watch. Like we've talked about before, there are certain QBs it actually works for them to sit and watch for that first season. It worked for Patrick Mahomes, for argument's sakes, and I don't think him missing a season or watching a season did him any harm whatsoever. But if you're number one overall, right, whether you think they should or they shouldn't, they are going to start. So the funny thing is, you mentioned a load of QBs there. How many of them lived up to expectation?
Not a
Right,
lot.
not a lot at all. Right, you know, you mentioned Bryce Young. I mean, he's played in a very,
Yeah,
very poor team, and I have felt so sorry for him over the past couple of years. And there's a player in there.
yeah.
I still believe there's a player
Yeah.
in Bryce Young, but he's not. He hasn't been in a situation where
Mhm.
he can showcase it. We were just talking about Sam Darnold, right? He wasn't in a team that he could show it when he was at the Jets. You look at Baker Mayfield, right? Did not work at the Browns. It was in a very, very poor team.
Wrong
He was
player.
smacked in the face every day. And yes, as from what we hear, there was a few personality issues in that locker room. Baker Mayfield was obviously not um, innocent in a lot of that kind of stuff, but he's had to go away and reinvent himself at a couple of teams to be a solid, dependable, starting quarterback and a very good one. Trevor Lawrence, you mentioned, he came out and he was the next big thing. He had the flowing hair, the poster boy for the Jaguars, and again, poor team. And it's getting to the stage now that people are beginning to ask, well, is Trevor Lawrence really as good as we thought it would be? Because losing is a hard habit to kick, right?
So hard.
Um, so it's going to be a tough one, but those guys have all started. They've made careers for themselves. A lot of them have got paid. You just hope that for Cam Ward's sake, it goes more the way of a Jaden Daniels than it goes the way of a Bryce Young.
Yeah, yeah. I think Tennessee Titans will be expecting big things, from Cam Ward. They've got to. They've got
Mhm.
to. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think the other player on that list would be Tyler Shocks for the New Orleans Saints. I think he's got a clear path to starting in week one because really with Derek Carr's retirement from the Saints, I think that just makes it, you know, undeniably that he's more than not going to get a starting position. Now he has to contend with Spencer Rattler, and I think with no offense to the young man, but I don't think he left a record last season that was inspiring for people to think he's going to start. I think he threw for 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. You kind of want those numbers not to even look like that. Maybe you want to reverse the interceptions as well as the touchdowns, but even you don't want them to be that close. So that means that every time he was throwing a touchdown, he was also throwing an interception. Not the greatest stats. And of course, the sample size is not great. I think it was 4 games. But even then, at 4 games, you still want a clean game as much as possible from your quarterback. So I think, Tyler Shough has got a good chance of starting. Kellen Moore has got a job on his hands. Absolutely got a job on his hands. This was a job that not a lot of, experienced coaches wanted. I think even Mike McCarthy pulled himself out of the race of becoming the head coach for the New Orleans Saints. Now, he would do incredibly well to get a winning record this season. And I'm hoping that they haven't set him up for failure, but he would do well to get something out of the team. Now, of course, they've still got, they play in a division that is not, exactly the strongest, the NFC South. So I would expect that, they can be competitive in that division because I think that division is Tampa Bay's, Buccaneers division pretty much. So yeah, I think Tyler Shops is going to start. I think he's got a clear path, to start. Now, the person who's probably got a more uphill task of starting of rookie quarterbacks is Jackson Dart for New York Giants. I think his part is a little bit more complicated because he's not just got one veteran; he's got two veterans on the team with Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson. And whatever anyone says about Russell Wilson, he went to the Super Bowl. He won a Super Bowl, right? So he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. So you would expect that he would still be very good. So you're gonna have to beat out those two players to get a chance to start. Now, you would think that the way that they drafted um, Dart means that they potentially feel that at some point during the season they're going to pivot to him. So maybe he might get some game time this year, but I don't expect it in week one. I expect, health withstanding, I expect Russell Wilson to start in New York Giants in week one. And I think he starts that game in week one. And then you now start to see where perhaps Jackson Dart can potentially get a few games.
No, I think that's not starting. I just want to go back though, just to talk about Shock or Show or whatever his name is. We were arguing about this before. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. But the one thing I think what will be quite interesting is obviously they've lost Eric Carr, the
Yeah.
Saints. That's freed up a huge amount of room on their roster from a wage perspective and a salary cap perspective. Do you think they trade in to a free agency? Do you think they look at the free agency for potential, whether it's a veteran quarterback? I think you've got any notes of someone like a Ryan Tannehill, or I think one thing I think that a lot of Saints fans should be doing is keeping an eye on the Browns. Now, the reason why I say that, the Browns are absolutely stacked at quarterback, right? They've got four going into it, and obviously two of those are rookies as well. But someone's got to miss out on that.
Yeah.
Is it going to be Flacco? Is it going to be one of the rookies?
Kenny Pickett.
But this
Deshaun Watson, you've not even.
Well, depending on what you believe, sure, Deshaun Watson's off doing something somewhere else. But I think Kenny Pickett, if he's the person to miss out, he is someone who the Saints could be looking for. So, okay, well, is he going to be a franchise quarterback? No. Is he going to be a safe pair of hands? Possibly over the season, possibly. So there's a couple of interesting things that I think, given where we are today, looking at the roster right now, Shock starts.
Yeah,
it's a shock start for Shock. The Derek Carr thing has opened a door up, and it's basically created a clear path for him.
Yeah,
but he's got training camp. He's got preseason to go and prove it.
Yeah,
right. If he doesn't, just looking at their depth chart, there's nobody else there who can really step up. I don't think.
no,
They'd have to bring someone else in, whether it is a grizzled old veteran like a Tannehill, or if it's someone who is surprisingly cut from another team.
yeah,
We have seen it. There is no Sam Darnold on that roster to sort of step up at the moment, is there? So I'd say sort of just watch that space. I think at the Saints, I think is the roster as it stands today. Shock's starting. But it wouldn't surprise me if they make more. There are more changes to that roster before the season starts.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point because um, quarterbacks are everything for teams, right? If you don't have the right quarterback, it's not just even about, getting your team to the playoffs or making the Super Bowl. It's keeping your fans interested, right? So football is still a business, right? You want, fans to be coming to the stadium watching. You want to sell hope, right? And if you're selling hope, you need to have a quarterback that can do something. So if you're already starting from preseason and it's looking like not one of these two quarterbacks are actually going to be any decent, you can't go into the season week one with two of them. So you've got to look for who to trade. And, Kenny Pickett is an interesting one because, I mean, Mike Tomlin made something out of Kenny Pickett, right, in the Steelers. Now, I think that Kenny Pickett is a player that needs a particular type of coaching. I don't think that he's just a natural, no offense to him. I mean, obviously I've never played, but I'm just, looking at, from what I see, I don't think a lot of the things come naturally for him. So I think that the only thing that would stop the Saints from drafting or trading for Kenny Pickett is just the fact that people might just say, well, how different is he from the people that you already have, right? On the team. And I think that might just be the one thing that might hold them from pulling that trigger. They might think to themselves, okay, do we go to the Colts? Obviously Colts has Anthony Richardson there, and they drafted Daniel Jones. I mean, not drafted, traded for Daniel Jones. Did they trade for him? No, he went as a free agent because he got cut from the Giants. But Daniel Jones is a quarterback that has played in the league before. He's won games. So does he lose the battle with Anthony Richardson and the Colts, and then he thinks, you know what, I might get a better chance of playing in the Saints. So maybe that's a name, I might watch out for, because you know what happens, right? Everybody starts to panic in that first week. So you just don't know how teams will shake up. But it's an interesting point you make. I think the Saints would have to make a move if those
Yeah.
two guys don't pan out.
I mean, there's, you mentioned again, just jumping forward to what you're talking about with the Giants, talk about Jackson Dart. At the Giants roster at QB, their depth includes Jackson Dart, rookie, Tommy DeVito, who played games last season, and Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Right, so you've got 3 out of the 4 QBs have started games in the NFL. Wilson and Winston have won games in the NFL. Winston obviously has been at his peak was a fantastic quarterback. So you look at that depth compared to the Saints. Now with the Giants, they can't keep all 4. You can't have 4 QBs.
Yeah.
So someone has to go. You would have thought it would be quality wise. You'd have thought it'd be Tommy DeVito, but he has obviously got strong ties. He's a local lad, as we would say over here. So he has strong ties to New York, and I think a lot of fans would be upset to see him go. So, but you've just signed Russell Wilson. You've just signed Jameis Winston. Do you trade one of those? And again, I mean, obviously Jameis Winston, for example, has history at the Saints. I can't see him going back, but I can't see him getting rid of Russell Wilson. So it's all very interesting. But I think the one thing that is clear to me is that that the rosters aren't set yet, and I think Derek Carr's unexpected and quite sad early retirement has opened up a lot. I think, and I think there's still going to be trades going in towards before we start the season. But let's take a pause there. We'll end part 2 there, and we'll be back in part 3 to look at what the season's all really about anyway, and that is a Hard Knocks series. So we'll be back soon. Welcome back to part 3 of Across the Gridiron. So Eddie, look, let's end this week's rambling about Hard Knocks. Right. So for those who don't know, Hard Knocks is a TV show that HBO, with the NFL, put together at the beginning of every season, where they follow the training camp of 1, sometimes 2 teams as they prepare for the season. It's a really, really good behind the scenes documentary. It's incredibly produced. The one thing the NFL do better than anything is their documentaries can be absolutely outstanding.
Full on contact. That is AFC North football.
The whole world watches. What are we gonna do?
Outstanding. This year, for the 2025 edition of Hard Knocks, they are following the Buffalo Bills training camp for the preseason. And what they're now doing is during the middle of the season, they tend to do another one. And this year, what they've decided to do is the entire NFC East. So that means you get full access to the Giants, the Commanders, and the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Eagles. And I think that's probably it, isn't it, Eddie? They're the 3 that most people are going to care about. So this is, look, as we know, this series is great. Last season it was about the Jets, looking at Aaron Rodgers coming in. There's already some fantastic. It can make for fantastic TV. So, are you excited? Does the Bills and the NFC East excite you, Eddie? Let's just talk about the Bills before the NFC East. This can't be a whole thing about the Cowboys. So let's start with the Bills.
Listen, from a curiosity perspective, this is the first time the Bills are being featured on Hard Knocks. So I was thinking to myself, what is the story going to be for the Bills? What are we trying to uncover? The story is about Josh Allen, right? This is Josh Allen's team. They're clearly made that point, loud for everyone. Kick Stephon Diggs out of the place to make sure that there is some drama in the fact that their running back, Dalvin Cook's brother, who plays as running back for the Bills, hasn't got paid. And obviously he's holding back. So there might be a bit of, behind the scenes on what that looks like when players are holding back, waiting for a contract, not participating in OTAs and things like that. So we might see some of that. We might, see the fact that they're also in the same division as your Miami Dolphins, as the Patriots, and as the Jets. So maybe we might get some adjacent, content relating to the Dolphins as well. So I'm curious, to see the behind the scenes of the Bills because sometimes it does reveal, some of the other stories on not too well-known players. Whether they're in the offense or defense, you get to hear a little bit about their stories. Maybe some of the draft rookies that are coming in that might make a splash, as well. Sometimes I watch it for intel, for fantasy as well. Maybe pick up on a player that no one is, got their eye on, as well. So I think you'll be interesting. I don't know what to say about it because
No,
those are not generally drama filled, but
no,
that's
it's not. It's not really. I've got to say when I was a little bit disappointed, and I mean, look, the thing is, everybody knows in a regular season where the Buffalo Bills are going to finish.
in the
Right,
player.
they are going to finish top of that division. Right, and it pains me to say it, but obviously the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Patriots aren't really going to be good enough to challenge them over the course of the season for that top spot. I would love to be proven wrong. Well, only if one of the teams do it. But yeah, so they're going to come top. I suppose that the interesting story is it's kind of because they are kind of like this. They're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They don't get to the Super Bowl because it happens every year. They beat the Chiefs in the regular season, they lose to the Chiefs in the playoffs, right? So that happens every single year, and I'm sure we'll end up doing the same. I don't think there's any real sort of drama other than let's look at this team, let's look at what a well-oiled machine they are. Can they finally make that next jump to get to the Super Bowl? But that for me is a story that you kind of want mid-season or you kind of want, going into the playoffs. There's just, you kind of watch these things as a neutral. You kind of want to see the team, the rookie team, the underdog story. That's the thing that kind of interests you, sort of the underdog story. Taking a team who's got a losing record. I mean, obviously, sorry, it was last year. Obviously, they did the Bears, didn't they? Sorry, it was the year before that was the Jets. So they did the Bears when they brought in their rookie QB, whose name's just escaped me.
The Bears, rookie
Yeah,
QB, Caleb
yeah.
Williams.
Thank you. So that was a really interesting story. It's about, how do you get this number one overall pick? How do you integrate him to the NFL? Let's see if let's get a look behind the scenes to see if he really is all that, right? There's just not really a huge amount of talking point. I don't think it is. But the one thing that Hard Knocks will do, it will find a story,
Yeah.
and it will. I'm sure it will be interesting. I'll be watching every episode, regardless. But yeah, it just didn't wasn't one that really sort of stood out to me. But just the way that they do it and the way that they
Yeah.
decide and which teams are eligible, which teams aren't eligible, they can't go for the story every single time. But so look, let's give you a platform for 5 minutes to talk about the NFC East. So this should be interesting. But I think what will be for me, what will be interesting for me would be how the season actually begins for the likes of the Cowboys and the Giants, because these are teams that who, as I said before, they can be spectacular or they could be awful. There is no kind of middle ground. You're going to have fans thinking they're going to win the Super Bowl, and then all fans are going to be really, really angry, right? You've obviously got the Super Bowl champions in there. You've got the Commanders in there. So there's potential for a lot of drama. Now, obviously, as a Cowboys fan, Eddie, when you saw that, where did your head go?
I mean, there's only one place to start, and that's the opening day fixture, right? The Cowboys against the um
Fly Eagles fly.
I know, I know. I just Cowboys against the Eagles. That's the only place to start, right? And so I expect to have a heavy dose of that in the Hard Knocks when that starts. That particular series gets shown in December. So typically they would have played a number of games, they would have followed them a little bit, into the first week of the game. And of course, all of that's going to be dominated by Micah Parsons, whether he gets paid or not. Cowboys do this all the time, whether they're going to pay their players, they know they're going to pay the player. Someone said this, that actually one of the reasons why the Dallas Cowboys don't pay their players on time is because of interest that they make from the bank from this money. So if you think about, they're going to pay a player 100 million, right? And if they get 10% interest, on that, that's what, is that 10 million? If they even make 1%, interest on that, that's 1 million. That's a sizable, amount of money. So why pay the person early when you can leave the money in the bank for a little bit longer and gain the interest? Now, I thought that was quite an interesting, way to look at it. And considering that, Jerry Jones is all about the business. That might be something that he does. And here am I talking about Dallas Cowboys when I should be talking about Hard Knocks. Now, as I go back to the Hard Knocks, I think there are storylines, all around the NFC East. I think there is a lot of things to squeeze out post Super Bowl, how the Eagles, sort of setting themselves. Do they have the same hunger? Do they have the same drive? Traditionally, this is always very difficult for teams that have made the Super Bowl to pick themselves up and go again, right? Because, I mean, players, at the end of the day, what are you playing this game for? You're playing it to get a lot of money, to make sure that your family is well taken care of. You're playing this game to get to the Super Bowl, and not a lot of players actually do that. They can play the whole career in the NFL, never make it to the Super Bowl, never mind winning one. You play it for maybe records, getting to the Hall of Fame. Again, very few players, actually do that. But if you're in a position where you've achieved all three, and I think about Saquon Barkley, he's not only gone to the Super Bowl, he's won the Super Bowl, he's got paid, and he also has got a record that is, I mean, he could have gotten the most rushing yards. They didn't pull him out of the last game. But, going over 2,000 yards, it's significant. That's not something that lots of players are going to do. So there's going to be an interest to see how that team, motivates themselves. They've had a couple of people leave the team, a couple of defensive players leave the team. Brendan Graham also retired as well this year. So, there's some storylines there. The Giants, all about the storylines. You've got Russell Wilson, you've got Jameis Winston, you've got the new rookie that they've drafted, you've got the Giants, Dayball might actually be on the hot seat, this season. So there's got all of that cooking, as well. Commanders, Jaden Daniels, is he going to take a step back? Is he going to push on? Is he going to be, like Patrick Mahomes, like everyone's been talking about? Or is he just going to come back to the level? So there's lots of stories. So I can see why they picked the NFC, because I think you're getting a, a you're getting a helping of not just one team, but multiple teams that are providing you with story and drama, to keep fans interested. And people have been saying, the Hard Knocks a little bit too polished. It's not giving that raw, hard hitting behind the scene. Well, if you're looking for drama, there's one place to go, and that's the Dallas Cowboys. It's going to give you plenty of drama.
Oh, without question, without question. And as I said, Hard Knocks certainly has a history of providing these sort of compelling narratives that really tap into the drama. And so, yeah, no, I think that's a lot of fans looking forward to. And yeah, so we both. So look, let's. I think that brings to a close what has felt like an absolutely mammoth session tonight, which I'm sure we only wanted to do like a short. These sort of short episodes just to keep the content going, just to give people something to listen to in the off season, and it's just turned into just an hour long chat. So good God, I feel sorry for the editor who's having to cut all this down. But look, let's call it for today. Thanks everyone for watching and for tuning in and for listening. We don't take it for granted. If you like it, please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your parents. Talk about it to your lover as you go to sleep at night. Do whatever you can for us. It's fantastic to see you as always. Eddie,
Yeah.
take us home.
Well, That's all done and dusted, guys. And like Matt said, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. But we also want to hear from you as well. So join in the conversation in the comments as well. And for me, the NFL's heating up, right, Matt? We are getting rookies, are getting their boots dirty. The Hard Knocks is about to give us drama that's thicker than a British Sunday roast. We've seen under we've seen underdogs
How
rise.
thick is your meat today?
Oh, you gotta think. Don't you have that really thick gravy, on it? That's how I like my Sunday roast.
Okay, right. Okay, fair enough. We need to work on your euphemisms, Eddie, I think. But anyway,
I think so.
carry on.
We've seen underdogs rise, stars stumble, and somewhere in New Orleans, there's a bloke named Tyler Shocks might just be writing his own legendary. And if you're ever doubting yourself, just remember Tom Brady was picked 199 in the draft. So whatever your draft position is in life, just keep showing off. So we'll catch you next week, same time, same channel. Don't forget, life's the contact sport, so hit back hard and enjoy the playbook.
Yeah, you bet you that they were my wedding vows, Eddie.
All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Take it easy.
I'm the bad guy. I'm the